Welcome to NEXTGames video on how to make Final Fantasy XI look beautiful in 2020. Now I intend for this video to show a baseline of how to modify your Final Fantasy XI install safely so that you can give this 18-year-old game a much needed facelift. I will focus on how to get your setup similarly to how you see in my videos, with a resolution of 1920 by 1080 with ultra graphics settings that will require a fairly new gaming system. If you happen to play on a lower resolution, or if your system is on the slower side, then you can still use the techniques in this video with some small changes that I will mention as we go along. Now, none of these methods will modify your existing Play Online or Final Fantasy XI install, which means you can remove them or simply choose not to use them at any time. Now I'm going to start with how to configure the Final Fantasy XI config tool. You can find this underneath the Start menu. Then you want to go to All Apps, scroll down to P for Play Online, and then click on the Play Online folder. The last thing you want to do is click on Final Fantasy XI Config. That will open the following screen. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is go to the Features tab and then click on the Save button underneath In-Game Settings. What this is going to save for us is that in-game config settings that we are about to change here in our next step. Go ahead and put in a comment of today's date and the word backup, and then I'm just choosing to go ahead and save this in my downloads folder. You can choose it wherever it's most convenient for you. I'm calling it FFXI config and today's date, and then hitting save, and we now have a backup of our in-game configuration settings. Okay, now let's go back to that General tab and we'll address some of these settings. Underneath Screen Settings, I select Borderless Window underneath Window Mode to get the biggest benefit from the settings that we're about to change. Next, resolution of 1920 by 1080 is ideally what you should have. If your system is not capable of this, you want to go with the highest resolution that your system is capable of. Next, UI size is for determining how big you want the user interface elements to be on your screen when you're playing. Ideally, we want to fit as many things as possible on our screen, so we want this to be set to the lowest setting that is available. Next is the Image Quality tab. I suggest you go ahead and set this for a preset of Ultra, and that will automatically change many of the sliders in the upcoming tabs for us. If your system can't handle this, obviously go ahead and back this down as necessary. The next option of brightness should always be left right in the middle, because we are going to be modifying this using different tools later on in the video. The last thing we'll talk about is the Play Opening Movie on Startup option. Obviously go ahead and have this unchecked unless you want to watch that opening movie every time you start up the game. Now next, let's go over the Graphics tab. Now if you've set the Ultra settings in the previous General tab, all of this is already going to be set correctly for you, but let's just briefly go over these settings. First off, underneath Screen Settings, Drawing Precision is how precisely it draws all of the objects on your screen. You always want this at least as high as your resolution, and in this case we actually have it twice as high as our resolution, which is the default for Ultra settings. Go ahead and make sure that Maintain Aspect Ratio is checked as well, because if you use a resolution that is not the same aspect ratio as your monitor used in the General Resolution tab, then it's going to cause a lot of issues for you. Underneath the Quality section, we have Textures, 2D Mapping, Fonts, and Vegetation Movement, all that you can give different levels of quality or movement in regards to how quick your system is. Most of present-day systems are going to be able to deal with all of these things just fine, but if you do happen to find that your system can't contend with them, you can go ahead and back some of these down until you find that you're getting the performance that you need. Draw distance is going to affect how things look that are in the distance from you, meaning basically how high quality those textures are. So you definitely want to have that checked so that those things that are in the distance for you actually look higher quality as opposed to just kind of garbled in a pixelated mess. Enhanced shading is going to turn on the texturing and shading of all the objects around you. That's going to overall make things look a lot better and give it a lot more definition, so I would definitely recommend always having that on as well. We've already addressed the Features tab, so let's move on to the Other tab, where we can enable sounds and change the number of simultaneous sound effects that can go on at once. I would go ahead and recommend bumping this up to 20. Now that play sounds in the background is going to be a personal choice. When you minimize the window or switch to a different active window, if you would like Final Fantasy music to keep playing, go ahead and leave that checked. Meanwhile, if you'd like it to stop playing, then uncheck that, and then when you minimize the Final Fantasy window, you will no longer hear the music of the zone that you're in. Now, I don't have a need to use any of these legacy settings, but if you do happen to be playing on an old Windows XP or Media Center PC and need to utilize any of these settings, go ahead and be sure to check them. But that's pretty much going to be it for the Final Fantasy XI config menu. Let's go ahead and move on to the in-game configuration menu and what changes can be made there to make the game look better. Okay, let's now move to the in-game menus, as many of these menus can affect graphics and sound. First, let's go to the configuration menu and then gameplay. Underneath here, of course, you can turn on and off auto targeting, but what we're really here for are the sound and gamma adjustment sections. Now in sound, the sound volume is usually very high for sound effects and usually only about 50% for music. This kind of creates an imbalance in the game, and I usually find it's better if you actually put both those at 50%. I change mine for my videos that I record, but I think most people will appreciate having both at 50%. Now for the gamma adjustment, you want to leave all those right in the middle where they are, because we'll be using different tools later in the game to modify those, so that's very important. Then of course there in the inventory section you can turn sorting on and off, and whether or not to go with type 1 or type 2. Type 2 being sorting by alphabetical, so that's what most people will probably want to go with. Now let's go underneath the Windows menu and see what options are available to us there underneath the Shared tab. Here's where we can select a multi-window option, which most people will want. I suggest selecting horizontal, leaving timestamp off, selecting the window type of 5, which makes it kind of transparent so you can see through it almost, and a window effect of on, and that will actually make it so that the windows are animated as you click on the different window menus and such. Now in regards to the settings for the individual window 1 and window 2, I actually have all the settings the same with the exception of window width. You want to have reactive window sizing on, the maximum lines displayed at 10, minimum lines at 0, and the resize time set at the maximum. And then the last setting that's different between window 1 and window 2 is this window width. You'll notice that it's a little bit bigger for Windows 2, as I find there's a bunch more text that gets displayed over there, and that's more helpful. But you can go ahead and play with that setting to kind of get whichever one of the two windows you want to be longer. Now let's go ahead and move on to the miscellaneous menu option. The first option is damage display. This is going to be where it displays the damage numbers on your screen. I kind of swap back and forth between just putting it in the log or both in the log and on the screen. The choice is yours. Sometimes with on the screen it kind of gets in the way of all the nice pretty graphics we're about to set up. Next is character information. This is just whether or not you want your character information to be shown when people are searching for you. Now is more of the graphics intensive stuff. Shadows. You definitely want this to be on high. You want weather effects to be on. You want the character models displayed to be at the maximum amount. Icon type you actually want to be on 2, which I know sounds unusual, but that is the default. And the PC armor display on normal. If you put that on static, then all the things like the glowies inside of the pulse armors and pulse weapons won't actually animate for you on other people's armor. So go ahead and keep that on normal to keep everyone looking pretty. That'll be it for the Miscellaneous 1 menu. Let's go ahead and move on to Miscellaneous 2. First option here is clipping plane. What this is going to do is affect how far from you things are going to be textured and drawn, so you want to have that at the maximum setting at all times. Footstep effects is the sound you hear as you're walking, so go ahead and keep that on. Animation frame rate is always supposed to be at the maximum, so the maximum amount of animations are being shown on your screen. Keyboard size is going to be dependent upon what you have at your specific location, but usually it's going to be full. Background aspect ratio. Now if you're on the 1920 by 1080 resolution, that means you're going to want to be on 16 by 9. Key assignment will be dependent upon the setup you have, but go ahead and leave that at default. And both macro palette options leave at their defaults as well. Now let's go ahead and quickly move on to Miscellaneous 3 and 4. Underneath Miscellaneous 3, you're going to make sure that all of these effects are turned on. Now, the only exception is going to be if you actually use a style lock gear set, you'll notice that style lock is going to be set to static, which is fine. Underneath Miscellaneous 4, just make sure software keyboard is set to off. And that's going to be it for our in-game settings. Wanted to go ahead and stop here and show you exactly what your game should look like at this point if you followed my settings. Now, of course, that is with the exception of that mini map over there. Now, it does look good. But as you'll notice, especially since you're fitting so much more on your screen now, things like those low quality resolution textures on things like the ground and wall are even more noticeable than they were before. These are some of the things we're going to be addressing with some of the further steps we're going to take in this video. Some additional drawbacks you may notice with this setup is that the colors look kind of muted. there is almost kind of a white haze over everything that is also muting the colors, and the ambient lighting is very poor when it comes to selecting things and them being highlighted. Those are all additional things that we are going to try and improve with the tools that we'll be discussing next. The first thing we need to do is download Windower 4. Go ahead and go to windower.net in your web browser and then click on the green Download Windower 4.3 button. This will download a windower.exe file. This is the actual Windower program, not the install program, so do not try and run it from this location. Instead, you want to cut the file and then paste it to where it is we're going to put it. I like to put it underneath Program Files, x86, create a folder called Windower 4, and then put it under there. However, due to your security restrictions, you may find issues with putting it here and modifying some of the files in there. So to make your life easy, making a Windower 4 directory underneath the root of any drive, and then putting windower.exe inside of that folder, and then running it, will launch the program, download all of the necessary add-ins and plugins, and get you started, just like you see here. Now that Windower is installed, we need to get it configured so we can take advantage of its graphics benefits. So the first thing we need to do is click on the pencil icon down there in the green taskbar, and that will edit this default profile that we are currently under. Now on the Windower tab of that default profile, you want to make sure that your resolution is set to 1920 by 1080, or whatever the maximum is for your system, that the region is set to auto detect, and that the window mode is set to borderless window, just like we had set in the previous Final Fantasy XI config settings. Under the Game tab, you'll want to enter the same settings that you used previously in the config menu. So hardware mouse should normally be off unless you are using that in legacy mode. Always play a sound is that setting that allows Final Fantasy to play sounds when it is minimized or in the background. So if you'd like sounds to play in that situation, go ahead and enable this. If you wouldn't like sounds playing in that situation, go ahead and disable this. Sound, of course, enables sound or disable sound altogether. From a graphics standpoint, you want to make sure that super sampling is checked, but you want bump mapping off, because if we actually enable that, it's going to mess with our ambient light settings. Always enable gamepad should also be off, that is of course unless you're using a controller. MIP mapping should be set to none. UI scale should be set to 1x because we want it to fit as many UI elements on the screen as possible. And then lastly, we want to leave gamma right there in the middle because again we're going to be modifying that with the reshader later on, and we don't want any previous settings to mess with what we will be doing then. The final tab is the Advanced tab, and we don't change any settings here. So go ahead and click that green arrow in the upper left-hand corner of this window, and that will be it for how to configure Windower. Now the last step we need to do in order to make sure Windower is ready is we need to make several changes to the init.txt file underneath the Windower directory. Now as this video goes along, we're going to need to make several changes to this init.txt file, and instead of having you make them individually, I suggest you go to my GitHub page here at the URL you see listed. Once you're on that page, you want to find the init.txt entry and click on it. Once you're in there, you want to click on the raw button, which will bring up all of the raw code in plain text in your web browser. You now want to hit Control A to select all of it, and then Control C to copy it. Or you can right click on it after you hit it Control A and select Copy. Now you want to go ahead and browse to your Windower 4 directory that we set up, go to the Scripts subfolder, and then right click on init.txt and go to Open. This should open it in Notepad. If it does not open it in Notepad, you want to close out of whatever's opened, right click on it again, go to Open With, choose another program, and then select Notepad so that it opens up like you see here. You now want to hit Control A to select what's there, and then right click Paste, or just simply hit Control V. That will paste the contents of what we copied from the GitHub. Now you want to click on File, Save, and this will save those changes. Now this may look like a lot of stuff here that we've pasted in, but really everything above NEXTGame Edits is things that really just should have been here that weren't. And then below NEXTGame Edits are going to be all of the things that we will be changing in our video. If you see the double slashes before each one of those entries, that means that is currently disabled. As we go through and add features to Final Fantasy, we will be going into this init.txt file and removing those slashes to enable those features. Now that we have all of that set up, ambient lighting should be working correctly inside of Final Fantasy. Let's go ahead and fire up the game and see what these changes have made now that we've added Windower 4 and configured it properly. What we have just added to Final Fantasy XI is some ambient lighting. Now in order to toggle this on and off, you will hit the F11 key on your keyboard. This will have two main benefits. One, when you click on both player characters and non-player characters, they will now blink when you highlight them. Secondary, dark areas of a room or area will look dark, meanwhile areas near light sources will be much more brighter like it should be with realistic lighting. I've just hit the F11 key and you'll see just how much more realistic this room looks with those lighting features enabled. You will also notice that when I highlight the Moogle now, he has a visible blinking animation to him. Here's one more time of me turning ambient lighting off and then back on again. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step where we're going to increase our frames per second from 30 to 60. To enable 60 frames per second is fairly easy. It's a two-step process. First, we want to go to the Plugins tab inside of Windower and make sure that the config plugin is downloaded and switched to on. You will now want to go underneath that scripts folder underneath Windower 4 again and right-click on init.txt and click open. Scroll to the very bottom and remove the / and the space before config frame rate divisor 1 so that it looks like this. Now go to File, Save, and close out of init.txt. Now let's open Final Fantasy XI and verify that we can get 60 frames per second. To see what your current FPS is, press the F12 key on your keyboard and that will bring up some red numbers in the upper right hand corner which represent your current frames per second. If this is below 30, then what we did not work. If it's higher than 30, then your computer is in fact uncapped to 60 frames per second. Now at any time you can type in / config space frame rate divisor 2 to change back to 30 frames per second as you see here, and then just changing that 2 to a 1 to switch it back to 60 frames per second as you see right here. Okay, that's it with frames per second. Let's move on to the next phase, which is going to be dealing with blinking. Now one of the more annoying aspects of Final Fantasy XI is even though that they give us all this gear that requires that we basically have to gear change in order to stay efficient, when doing so, it constantly makes us disappear from the screen, which is very annoying, like you're seeing right here. Now there is an add-on called Dress Up that allows you to remove this functionality for both you and others that will make your gameplay experience much better. So let's go ahead and get that installed right now as well. Now that Dress Up is installed and configured, let's go ahead and see what happens when I try and recast those shadows now. There we go. That's much better. Okay, now let's move on to the next thing, which will be installing and configuring DGVoodoo. Now DGVoodoo 2 is simply an application that will take the DirectX technology that was used back in the original release date of Final Fantasy XI and update it to today's DirectX release. In order to get this to work, we need to go to the URL that you see listed here at the top of the page. Also note that I'll be putting all of these links that I've asked you to go to in the comment section below the video for easy access. Now once you're on this site, click on this link here saying D3D compiler _47 to download the first zip file. And then click on DGVoodoo 2.63.1 to download the second zip file. Now, some time may have passed between the time that I've released this video and when you're watching it, so if this page looks a little different, you want to download the latest stable release. Now you also may get a warning down here in your task tray once you download the DGVoodoo file saying that it's not familiar with it and it may be dangerous. It is safe. You can go ahead and select to keep it so that we can then work with the file. Now you need to go to the folder where you downloaded the files, right-click on the D3D compiler, go to Extract All, and then just go ahead and hit Extract, and it'll extract it to the subfolder inside of this directory. There's just a single file inside. Right-click on it, go to Copy, then you want to go to your Windows directory. Now, if you're on a 32-bit Windows installation, you want to go to System32. If you're on a 64-bit installation, you want to go to syswow64. This is a 64-bit install, so we'll go into syswow64. You want to right-click on this empty area on the right here, and then go to Paste. You'll ask if it wants you to overwrite the file. Go ahead and hit Yes. And now the compiler is installed. If you have a 32-bit install of Windows, then you would just simply do the exact same procedure, but underneath the System32 folder, underneath the Windows directory. Now let's install DGVoodoo 2 itself. To do this, right-click on the zip file we downloaded, and go to Extract All, and then click on Extract. Now we're only going to need some of these files. To start with, double-click on the MS subfolder, and then the x86 subfolder. This is regardless of whether you have a 64 or 32-bit install of Windows. Now hold down the Control key on your keyboard as you select D3D8, D3DIMM, and DDraw. Once they are all highlighted like this, right-click on them and go to Copy. Now you need to browse to the C drive, Program Files x86, Play Online, then the Square Enix folder, and then double-click on the Play Online Viewer folder, which is where we will put these DLLs. Now if you've installed Final Fantasy to a different location on your hard drive, then you'll need to go there instead to paste these files. Just go ahead and right-click on the right-hand side there and go to Paste like we did before. It's going to ask you if you want to overwrite these files in some instances. Just go ahead and say yes in all cases. And now we have those DLLs installed. Next, we're going to set up the DGVoodoo application itself. To do this, right-click on the exe that was in the folder that we unzipped and go to Run as Administrator. Now there are some false positives out there by some antivirus softwares that will label this as a virus. Some of the more well-known ones like Malwarebytes have been good enough to take it off their list, but some of the lesser-known ones are still marking it. So if this happens to be labeled as a virus, it's been scanned every which way, I can assure you it's not. You want to go ahead and let it past your virus software. Now that we are in the app, the first thing we want to do is change the configuration folder and running instance. So click that Add button you see there in the upper right-hand corner of the window, and we're going to want to point it to Program Files x86, Play Online, Square Enix, Play Online Viewer. Now, of course, if you've installed Final Fantasy to a different location, once again, you want to point it there. Once it's pointed to the Play Online Viewer directory, go ahead and hit Select, and now it's created the configuration file and we can make changes. Make sure all of your settings match what you see here, and then let's go ahead and move on to the next tab, which will be DirectX. Now, underneath the DirectX tab, you want to make all of your settings look just like this. The only two exceptions being if you have a video card that has less than 2 gigs of memory, go ahead and lower that VRAM number to the amount that you have with your video card. And then the resolution, of course, if your resolution happens to be lower than 1920 by 1080, you want to set that to whatever your resolution is as well. Now let's boot up the game and see if we loaded that correctly. Now verifying that DGVoodoo is working is quite easy. All you have to do is open Play Online Viewer and look in the lower right hand corner. If you see the DGVoodoo logo, then that means it is successfully working and you did everything correct. Now, of course, we don't want that logo always down there in our game, so we're going to go ahead and disable that now. Let me show you how. Simply go back to your DGVoodoo extracted zip file, right-click on that DGVoodoo exe again, and go to Run as Administrator. First thing you want to do is make sure that you're working in the correct config folder instance, so I'd make sure that says Play Online Viewer in it. Once it does, go over to the DirectX tab and make sure you uncheck the DGVoodoo watermark as I have done here. Then hit Apply and OK. And you should no longer see that watermark. Now the last tool we need to download before we can start modifying the textures is the ReShader. Please go to this URL you see listed up here, scroll to the bottom of the page and click on the Download ReShade button. Next you want to go to where you downloaded it, right click on the ReShade setup file and select Run as Administrator. Now select a game and then click on Browse. Now you want to browse to that Program Files x86, Play Online, Square Enix, Play Online Viewer folder, and then select pol.exe. Now you'll want to select the Direct3D 10, 11, and 12 option. Now once in here, these are all the effects that we can install, and it's frankly a bit overwhelming. So go ahead and check the Uncheck All box, and we're only actually going to use a few of these. The first one that you want to check is Clarity. You'll then want to scroll down just a little bit and select Levels and Luma Sharpen. The fourth and final one that we're going to select is at the very bottom, and its name is Vibrance. After all those are selected, hit OK. Now if you'd like, you can go ahead and enable more of these if you want to actually play with how they work, but these are the ones that I found work best and give the most benefit when playing Final Fantasy XI. After you've done all those, go ahead and close out of that menu as all the settings are saved as soon as you hit OK. And let's go ahead and see if this loaded up correctly in Final Fantasy. Just like with DGVoodoo, we do not need to log all the way into the game to make sure that the ReShader is working. Simply open play online, and if it's working, you should see a new interface at the top part of your screen saying that you can run the tutorial by hitting the home key. If you see this ReShader menu, go ahead and continue to log in and we will configure it. So here we are with both the ReShader and ambient lighting working. If we hit the home button, it will automatically open this menu. Now you can go ahead and go through the tutorial, but we're going to skip the tutorial in this instance. And I wanted to show you exactly how you can turn these on and off. So it's simply just checkboxes. You can uncheck them and check them as you wish. And then down there near the bottom you can actually see where you can change the specific settings when it comes to each of the individual options. I find that the defaults work just fine for my taste, but if you really wanted to hone in on exactly where it is you want it for yourself, feel free to modify those settings that you see there at the bottom. One last thing I wanted to show you is if you click on the Settings tab, the Home button is normally the button that will bring up this menu, and I find that very cumbersome, especially when you're using the numeric keypad to move around with Final Fantasy. So I would go ahead and click on that, and then I usually select the tilde in the upper left-hand corner, as I'm not really using that for anything else. And then additionally, I usually select a key to toggle on and off the effects that you see from the ReShader, and I usually toggle that key to be pause because it just happens to be the only other key that I'm not using. So now with pressing the F11 key and the pause key, you can exactly see what those two changes of the ambient lighting and the ReShader are making to our game. Now these changes may not look huge yet, but it's kind of a stepped process. In the next step, we're going to be actually changing all of the textures in the game, and that's where a lot of these changes that we've already made are really going to come into form. Okay, now we need to install XI Pivot so that we can safely install textures without messing up our default Final Fantasy XI installation. You need to go to this web page that you see up here in the upper left hand corner. Once there, click on this XI Pivot Windower version .0.3.1.zip. Now you need to browse to the location where you downloaded that file, right click on it, extract all, and then click extract. Inside of here is a single folder called XI Pivot. Right click on it and then copy. Now you're going to browse to the location where you've installed Windower, and we need to go into the add-ons folder underneath Windower 4. Inside here, just go ahead and right-click Paste to put the XI Pivot folder. Now the last thing we need to do to install XI Pivot is to go into the Windower 4 folder, then go inside the Scripts subfolder and double-click on init.txt as we need to modify that file again. Go ahead and scroll to the bottom of the file, and here's where you will see that we need to delete the slashes from the next entry in the list, which will be LUA load XI Pivot. Go ahead and delete those slashes in the space, then hit File, Save as usual, and close init.txt. Next, we need to go back into that Windower 4 directory, then go underneath Add-ons, and then XI Pivot. Now we need to right-click in the empty area here and go to New, Make New Folder. Go ahead and call that new folder Data. Double-click on it, right-click in there again, go to New, Folder, and call this one DATS with D-A-T capitalized. Now that you've created those, we need to right-click on the settings.xml file in the root of the Windower 4 directory and go to Edit. Now we're going to need to make a small change to here, so what I need you to do is go directly where it says Auto Load and hit Enter a few times. Now go ahead and go up and do 2 spaces, and then bracket, global, end bracket. Then do a tab on the next line, type in bracket, overlays, end bracket, bracket slash overlays, end bracket. Now on the next line, do 2 spaces, then a bracket, slash global, end bracket, and then do some deletes to go ahead and bring it all together. It should look like this when you're finished. Once it's like this, go ahead and hit File, Save. Now it's time to download our first texture mod that we will be installing. It's going to be called XIView 2.0, and you can get to it by going to the link you see at the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Once on this page, click on the Clone and Download button, and then click on Download Zip to download the zip file that contains all the files necessary. Now we need to go to the download location, right-click on the zip file, extract all, extract. Now we want to go inside of the unzipped folder, which is called XIView Master. Inside of there, the main folder we're going to deal with is called O2-widescreen. Now, if for whatever reason you do happen to have a 4:3 resolution screen, you would of course use the normal screen option instead. Go ahead and double click on widescreen, and underneath there you'll see a single ROM folder. Go ahead and right click on that, and then go to copy. Next, you need to browse back to the Windows 4 directory, and then go underneath add-ons, then XI pivot, and then go underneath the data and DATS subfolders that we created. Once you're in there, go ahead and create a new folder. Call this folder XI-view, spelled just like you see there on the screen, and then within this folder, go ahead and paste that ROM folder that we copied from the original zip file. Now the last thing we need to do is simply tell XI pivot to load XIView every time that Final Fantasy loads. To do so, simply go to Windows 4, then Scripts, then right-click on init.txt like we normally do, and then go to Open. Once inside, scroll to the bottom, and you want to delete the / space in front of pivot A XIView. Then go ahead and hit File, Save, and close out. XIView is now loaded. Let's go ahead and open the game and make sure we are getting what we expect. Okay, so now we've come to a frustrating part of the video. I have spent the last 2 days trying to get XI pivot to actually load XIView like we have just done. And as you can see in the upper left hand corner there, it does load the new icons, and it's been doing that since 2 days ago when I initially loaded this. However, if you look above my head, the master stars are not correct. Neither is the fonts used for the menus in the upper right hand corner. Now, I have tried every which way to get this to load, and as you'll see here, I'll go ahead and type in a pivot status entry, and it will show you that the XIView is loaded and that it is enabled, which is of course even proved by the fact that the XI icons are loaded. But for whatever reason, it just will not display the changes for the master icon above my name or the font in the upper right hand corner there. It was originally thought that maybe Final Fantasy was loading the textures too soon, so I also went ahead and tried just loading the textures right here from the command line window, not before this point, and of course that did not work either. Now once again it had the similar result of making my icons change, but not the ones above my head for master and not the fonts in the upper right hand corner. So I'm sorry to say if you've been following the video and you're having the exact same experience I am, where the icons in the upper left are changing, but the master stars are not becoming 3D, and the upper right hand corner fonts are not changing, then the only recourse you have is to overwrite the DAT files inside of the ROM folders underneath your Final Fantasy XI install. Now we have backups of these files so we can easily go back to the way it was before, but if you don't feel comfortable doing this, go ahead and feel free to skip this step. The only thing that's going to change is the way the fonts look in the menu in the upper right hand corner, and the way master stars are displayed both above your head and others around the world. So to get XIView to work properly, go ahead and go back to this XIView master folder that we unzipped earlier. Now just to show you, if you go to the original backup folder here, here's a backup of all the files that we are about to replace. So if at any time you choose that you don't like the changes we're about to make, all you need to do is copy this folder over the folder we're about to copy it into, as opposed to the one that we're about to do. Instead though, we would like the changes, so you want to go into the widescreen folder, right click on this ROM folder, and go to copy. Now you want to browse to C, Program Files x86, Play Online, Square Enix, Final Fantasy XI, and here is where all the texture ROM folders are located for the game. Go ahead and right click on the right hand side there and go to Paste. It'll ask if you want to replace 4 files with the same name. Hey yes, and go ahead and overwrite all 4 files. Now XIView has been successfully installed. Here we are back in the game after those changes. You can see the status icons still look like they're supposed to from the XIView installation, but now the master stars above our head also look correct, as does the fonts for the menu in the upper right hand corner. I'll go ahead and flash back really quick to the way it looked before just to kind of give you an idea of the difference. One thing to keep in mind is the files that we just overwrote are sometimes updated during the monthly updates to Final Fantasy XI. If you happen to log in after one of those updates and notice that the stars above your head have reverted to the two-dimensional look, or in the upper right hand corner the fonts are blurry again, you want to go ahead and go to the link for XI View. There will more than likely be a new version for you. Go ahead and download that and copy that ROM folder underneath the widescreen subfolder to the same location we copied here just a minute ago. You are now all set up to use high quality textures, and that is in fact the last thing we have to do is add those textures to the game. I have created an all-in-one texture pack that I suggest you start with. It's basically going to give you access to all of the textures that have been released through today that I think are looking good in Final Fantasy. Now, if after you add this, you think it's a little bit much or your computer's a little overwhelmed, you can definitely go ahead and uninstall this add-on pack and kind of go out to this link that I'll provide here where you can find individual high-quality texture mods. Now, if you go ahead and use my all-in-one pack, you'll be able to install all of the high-quality texture packs in just about a minute. So, in order to get this, it's just one file. Go ahead and go to my Google Drive account. I'll go ahead and leave the link down there in the description. Once you get here, go ahead and go to Download Anyway and let this file download. It's about 3.5 gigs, so it is going to take a few minutes, but it's got all the files you need inside. After that FFXI HD file is downloaded, just go ahead and go to the Downloads folder, right-click on it, go to Extract All, and then hit Extract. This will extract all of the textures you need to a single folder called FFXI-HD. Once it finishes extracting, it will show you a folder inside of this folder also called FFXI-HD. This is the folder that you want to right-click on and copy. Once again, make sure you are right-clicking and copying on the folder inside of FFXI-HD called FFXI-HD. Now you want to browse to where your Windower folder is, then to Add-ons, then XIPivot, then Data, and then DATs. And then go ahead and paste it in this folder. After this copy process is finished, all we need to do is go back into that init.txt file that we've been modifying all along and remove 2 more slashes and a space before the next entry to make sure that FFXI-HD loads. Let's go ahead and show you how that works. All you need to do is go into that scripts folder underneath Windows 4, right-click on init.txt. Let's go ahead and scroll to the bottom. And there's our pivot A FFXI-HD entry. Delete the / and the space like you see here. Hit save, then close, and we are ready to see what high definition textures look like. Now before you even get into the game, it should be immediately apparent to you that the high definition textures have been loaded. Specifically if you look at the ground here all over Gustavberg, it should be very obvious that it is a high definition texture. Same with the grass here. As well as the body that I'm wearing, even though your body may not be high definition depending on what armor you're wearing. I thought it would be good to kind of go back to where we originally started just to remind you that this is what things looked like when we first started changing things. Look at that stone texture on the floor, the wood texture on the walls, and I'll go ahead and look at those flowers over there as well. And just exactly how low quality those images are. Now let's take a look at what our game looks like now. Look around and look at all the stone and wood textures that you see around you that have so much more detail and definition to them. Not to mention, the lighting effects are also adding some nice details as well. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like in some of the Eshin zones. Now here we are again, showing exactly what things looked like before we changed anything. This is what Eshin Ruan looked like. Now the last one may have not been a big enough difference for you, but I guarantee this one you're definitely going to notice a big change. This is the way Eshin Ruan looks now. Things look just a bit more lively and detailed. Go ahead and look at the grass on the floor as well as all the foliage around you. It's definitely a completely different place to be, and it feels like a different game entirely in my opinion. Here's another example for you of Mist Coast. Go ahead and look at that waterfall in the distance as well as apparently what that's supposed to be water in the lake there. And the grass that you see around you. Now of course this is what it looked like when we started. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like now. And here we are. Again, as you can tell, a pretty substantial difference with the waterfalls in the distance and the moving water that you can now see in the river and the lake. The grass textures are also much more detailed and high texture, as is the tree bark over there. Now here's the last one. Sadly, I don't have a before for this one, but you can definitely see the detail of the trees and the grass and even the dragon there. This is exactly how your game should look when you're finished with all of this stuff that we've been working through for the last 40 minutes. Now, 3 quick things before we go that will allow you to finish this setup nicely. First off, if you find that some of the settings that I'm using inside of this shader aren't to your liking, such as the sharpness, you can very easily go in here and turn it off. If you remember, we actually set this up so you can use it using the tilde key. So once you hit the tilde key, you enter this screen. If you look towards the bottom there, I'm moving the sharpness up and down with that meter. You can customize all of these options down there in that bar. So if you actually want to start playing with this further and getting the settings just like you like them, feel free to. All you have to do is uncheck one to turn it off and check it to turn it back on again. The next thing I wanted to show you is how to add your own textures if you choose to do so. In order to do this, you need to go into the Add-ons, XI Pivot, Data, DATS folder. Now right-click in here, create a new folder, and call it anything you like. We're just going to call it New Mods with a capital N and M. Capitalization is important for this. Now you want to go back to your Windower 4 directory, then into the scripts folder, right-click on that init.txt and go to Edit. Now we're actually going to have to create our own entry since you're going to do something here unique to yourself. So what you need to do is type in here underneath the last entry of pivot A FFXI-HD and add pivot A space and then whatever it is the name of that folder it was that you entered. Make sure that you keep the case the same because case is important. Once it's like it's supposed to be, go ahead and hit File, Save, close out of this, and everything in that folder should load the next time that you load Final Fantasy. The last thing I wanted to show you is simply how to send a shortcut to your desktop to this profile that we've just created in this session. To do that, click this pin icon you see right here. Then feel free to right-click on that icon on your desktop and name it anything you wish. Then, anytime you double-click on that icon, it'll simply bypass the Windower selection screen and automatically log you into Play Online. That's going to be it for this video. I hope people have found this helpful. For the next video, I'm going to show everyone all of the add-ons that I use in Windower 4 and how to install and configure them. Have a great week, everyone.